Hi, guys. So during this pandemic, it's sometimes hard to be a reader. And so one of the suggestions was to reread a book that you loved. So today I'm going to start reading a book that I loved. I read it 2 summers ago, and yeah, I believe. And then I read it to my fourth graders that year. And it's called The Wild Robot by Peter Brown. So here we go. Let's leave our reality and go to the island. Our story begins on the ocean, with the wind and the rain and the thunder and lightning and the waves. A hurricane roared across and raged through the night, and in the middle of the chaos, a cargo ship was sinking, down, down, down to the ocean floor. The ship left hundreds of crates floating in the surface, but the hurricane thrashed and swirled and knocked them all around, and the crates also began sinking into the depths. One after another, there they were swallowed up by the waves until only 5 crates remained. By morning, the hurricane was gone. There were no clouds, no ships, no land in sight. There was only calm waters and clear skies, and those 5 crates lazily bobbing along in the ocean current. Days passed, and the smudge of green appeared in the horizon. As the crates drifted closer, the soft green shapes slowly sharpened into the hard edges of the wild, rocky island. The first crate rode to shore in a tumbling, rumbling wave and crashed against the rocks with such force that the whole thing burst open. Now, reader, what I haven't mentioned is that the tightly packed inside each crate was a brand new robot. The cargo ship had been transporting hundreds of them before it was swept into the storm. Now only 5 robots were left. Actually, 4 were left because when that first crate crashed into the rocks, the robot inside shattered to pieces. The same thing happened to the next crate. It crashed against the rock, and the robot parts flew everywhere. And then it happened to the next crate, and the next. Robot limbs and torsos were flung to the ledges. A robot head splashed into a tide pool. A robot foot skittered into the waves. And then came that last crate. It followed the same path as the others, but instead of crashing against the rocks, it sloshed against and remained the remains of the first 4 crates. Soon more waves were heaving upon the water. It soared through the air, spinning and glistening, until it slammed down onto a tall shelf of a rock. The crate was cracked and crumbled, but the robot inside was safe. Chapter 2: The Otters. The island's northern shore had become something of a robot gravesite. Scattered around the rocks were broken bodies of the 4 dread robots. They sparkled in the early morning light, and their sparkles caught the attention of some very curious critters. A gang of sea otters was romping through the shallows when one of them noticed the sparkling objects. The otters all froze. They raised their noses in the wind, but they smelled only the sea. So they cautiously crept over to the rocks to take a closer look. The gang slowly approached the robot torso. The biggest otter stuck out his paw, swatted the heavy thing, and quickly jumped back, but nothing happened. So they wiggled over to the robot hand, and another brave otter stuck out his paw and flipped the hand over. It made a lovely clinking sound on the rocks, and the otter squeaked with delight. They spread out and played with the robot arm and legs and feet. More hands were flipped. One of the otters discovered a robot head in the tide pool. They all dove in and took turns rolling it along the bottom. And then they spotted something else. Overlooking a gravesite was one surviving crate. Its sides were scraped and dented, and its wide gash ran across the top. The otter scrambled up the rocks and climbed onto the big box. 10 furry faces poked through the gash, eager to see what was inside. What they saw was a brand new robot, but this robot was different from the others. It was still in one piece, and it was surrounded by spongy, foaming packing foam. The otters reached through the gash and tore the foam. It was so soft and squishy. They squealed as they watched snatched at the fluffy stuff. Shreds of foam floated away on the sea breeze. And in all that excitement, one of their paws accidentally slapped an important little button on the back of the robot's head. Click! It took a while for the other otters to realize that something was happening inside that crate. But the moment later they heard it, a loud whirling sound. Everyone stopped and stared, and the robot opened her eyes. Chapter 3, The Robot. The robot's computer brain booted up. Her program began coming online, and then, still packed in her crate, she automatically started to speak. Hello, I am Razum, Unit 7134, but you can call me Roz. While my robotic systems are activating, I will tell you about myself. Once fully activated, I will be able to move and communicate and learn. Simply give me a task, and I will complete it. Over time, I will find better ways to complete my tasks. I will become a better robot. While I am not needed, I will stay out of the way and keep myself in good working order. Thank you for your time. Now I am fully activated. Chapter 4, The Robot Hatches. As you might know, robots don't really feel emotions, not the way animals do. And yet, as they sat there, and as she sat in her crumpled crate, Roz felt something like curiosity. She was curious about the warm ball of light shining down from above, so her computer brain went to work and she identified that it was the sun. The robot felt her body absorbing the sun's energy. With each passing minute, she felt more awake. When her battery was good and full, Roz looked around and realized she was packed inside a crate. She tried to move her arms, but they were restrained by cords, so she applied more force. The motors in her arms hummed a little louder, and the cords snapped. Then she lifted her hands and pulled apart the crate. Like a hatchling breaking free of a shell, Roz climbed out and into the world. Chapter 5, A Robot Gravestone. The otters were now hiding behind the rock. Their round heads nervously poked up, and they watched the sparkling monster emerge from the crate. The monster slowly turned her head, and she scanned the coastline. Her head turned and turned all the way around, and it didn't stop turning until she was looking right at the otters. Hello, otters. My name is Roz. The robot's voice was simply too much for the skittish creatures. The biggest otter squeaked, and the whole gang suddenly took off. They galloped back across the robot gravesite, flopped into the ocean, and raced along the waves just as fast as they could. Roz watched the otters go, but her eyes lingered on the sparkling objects that littered the shore. The objects looked strangely familiar. The robot swung her left foot forward and then her right, and just like that, she was taking her very first steps. She stomped away from the crate and over the rocks and through the gravesite until she was standing above the broken robot body. She leaned in and noticed the word Razum lightly etched into the torso. She noticed the same word on all the torsos, including her own. Roz continued exploring the gravesite until it was playfully little ocean wave washed over the rocks. She automatically stepped away from it. Then a bigger wave sloshed toward her, and she stepped away again. And then a gigantic wave crashed over the rocks and engulfed the entire gravesite. Heavy water poured against her body and knocked her to the ground, and her danger sensors flared for the first time. A moment later, the wave was gone, and Roz lay there, dripping and dented and surrounded by dead robots. Roz could feel her survival instincts, the part of the computer brain which made her want to avoid danger and take care of herself so she could continue functioning properly. Her instincts were urging her to move away from the ocean. She carefully got to her feet, and she saw high above the shore the land was bursting with trees and grass and flowers. It looked lush and safe up there. It looked much like a much better place for a robot. She had just one problem. She had to get up there, and she would have to climb the sea cliffs. Chapter 6, The Climb. Crack, thud, clang. Roz was having a little trouble climbing the cliffs. She had a new dent on her rear and a long scrape along her side. She was just about to get another ding when the crab scuttled out from a piece of driftwood. The crab looked up and immediately showed off its giant claws. Everyone was afraid of his claws, but not the robot. She looked down at them and introduced herself. Hello, crab. My name is Roz. After a brief standoff, the crab cautiously backed away, and that's when Roz noticed how easily he moved over the rocks. With a wide stance and grippy feet, the crab could crawl up and down the rocks so fast. So Roz decided to try out that climbing technique. She spread her arms wide and clamped down on each of her hands into the cliffside, and then she jammed one foot into a crack and lifted another into a narrow ledge, and just like that, she was climbing. Roz moved awkwardly at first, a chunk of rock crumbling in her hands, and then she had trouble finding footholds. But soon she climbed higher and higher. She started to get the hang of it. Seagulls squalled from her cliff nests and soared away from the robot came too close. But Roz paid them no mind. She was focused only on getting up to the top. Up, up, and up she went, methodically climbing past nests and ledges and tiny trees and rooted in the cracks, but before long our robot felt the soft soil of the island beneath her feet. Here. Chapter 7, The Wilderness. Animal sounds filled the forest, chirps and wing beats and rustling in the underbrush, and then from the sea cliffs there came new sounds, heavy, crunching footsteps. The forest animals fell silent, from their hiding spots. They watched the sparkling monster stomp past. But the forest was not an uncomfortable place for Roz. Jagged rocks and fallen trees and tangled underbrush made it difficult for her to walk. She stumbled along, struggling to keep her balance, until her foot snagged and she toppled over like a piece of timber. It wasn't a bad fall, no dings, no dents, just dirt. But Roz was programmed to keep herself in good working order. And once she was back on her feet, she suddenly began clearing herself off. Her hands darted around her body, quickly brushing and picking off every speck of dirt. Only when the robot was sparkling again did she continue through the forest. Roz stumbled on until she found a patch of ground that was flat and open and carpeted with pine needles. It seemed like a safe place, and safety was what the robot really wanted. So she stood there, motionless, all perfect lines and angles set against an irregular shape of the wilderness. Chapter 8, Pine Cones. If you stand in a forest long enough, eventually something will fall on you. And Roz had been standing in the forest long enough. A gentle wind whispered through the treetops, and then thunk! A pine cone bounced off her head. The robot looked down and watched the pine cone roll to a stop. It was harmless, so Roz went right back to doing nothing. A few hours later, a gust of wind rushed through the treetops, and then thunk! The robot looked to another pine cone rolled away. And then a few hours later, a howling wind tore through the treetops, and the trunks shook branches, and then thunk, thunk, thunk! Pine cones began raining down. Thunk, thunk! Roz felt something, like annoyance. Thunk! She quickly scanned the area for somewhere safe from pine cones, and then she spotted the perfect place when she looked at the huge rocky shape that towered above the forest. We'll stop there. Have a great day. See you next time.